Hey everyone, this is Victor from Cyborg for Life, and today I have a very special interview for you. He's a world-renowned expert on the patterns of human growth and development and the factors that play into it. Please enjoy the interview with Dr. Barry Bogin. All right, everyone, today we have a very special guest joining us. He is an anthropologist whose research focuses on various factors affecting human growth across international populations. Having earned numerous awards and published several publications and keynotes on the topic, including a new book, he's the world's most renowned expert on patterns of human growth and development. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barry Bogin. Hey, Dr. Bogin, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you, Victor.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining. I mean, this is a real honor because of the fact that your life's work is literally what I talk about on my channel here. So before we begin, I just want to kind of mention some of your qualifications and your background. So you were born in the U.S., you studied at Temple University in Philly, where you earned your bachelor's, master's, and PhD in anthropology. Then you worked as a visiting professor at the Universidad de Valle in Guatemala, where you did research on the growth of children and their families. And then you went back to the U.S., at Wayne State University in Detroit, followed by University of Michigan, Dearborn for nearly 25 years. And then in 2007, you were appointed at London Borough University in the UK, where you recently retired in 2018. Is that correct?
You got it. I'm wearing my Loughborough t-shirt.
He's got it on. That's awesome.
Yeah, because no one knows where it is, how to spell it, and once it's spelled, how to pronounce it. L-O-U-G-H.
Yeah.
B-R-O-U-G-H. It's the two of the 9 or more different O-U-G-H sounds in English.
Oh, is it?
Borough.
Loughborough. You know, that's how you say it. Loughborough.
There's at least 9 ways to pronounce O-U-G-H in English, including a sound that one pronunciation is fish.
The fish. That's funny. Yeah, I definitely got that wrong. Well, thanks for
it's a crazy place, but if any of your listeners are into what we call football in Europe and Americans call soccer, it's near Leicester, the city of Leicester. Leicester City won the championship a few years ago.
Oh, yes.
Some of your soccer football listeners might know where Loughborough is.
Devoted your entire career to studying human growth and the factors that affect it. And so on my, a lot of the content that I focus on is on limb lengthening, which is either to help patients either correct a limb discrepancy, meaning they have one leg shorter than the other, but also in the recent years, it's been used for stature lengthening for people who are looking to increase their height. And your findings and analysis on human growth of nearly every aspect that one could think of, I mean, it gave me a true deep insight into how humans develop and grow. So it's really amazing because in your 3rd edition of your recent book, Patterns of Human Growth, which I read and was absolutely amazing, I found out that there was so much more. Yeah. I mean, like there's so many aspects that go into, human growth. It's not just, genetics, but, you have epigenetics, then you have psychological, political, and we're going to talk about all of that in the interview. So I'm so impressed with your work. But before we begin and get into your book, I just wanted to kind of get, the background on you. How did you get interested in doing your work on human growth and development?
Oh, that's a long time ago. I'll see if I can remember. No, I remember. I really didn't start out interested in human growth.
Okay.
A long time ago in high school, I wanted to do something about the past, really. And I went to my high school guidance counselor and said, I think I want to do archaeology. I really didn't know that archaeology in the US is like one of the 4 subfields of anthropology. I had just seen television shows about, archaeological work. And okay, so I want to do archaeology. And my high school guidance counselor, bless her heart, said, oh, there's only one place you can study that. And I was in Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia. That's the University of Pennsylvania. And you won't be able to get in there. I had no idea why. I thought maybe I was just too stupid. I don't know. But of course, there's hundreds of places where you can study archaeology besides University of Pennsylvania. Penn is a very fine anthropology department and archaeology group. But okay, so she told me that. So I ended up starting at Temple University, a state university in Philadelphia, and started in biology.
Mm.
And just by chance, I got a job with one of my biology professors who was studying the development, not of people,
Mhm.
not of people, but of, if you remember your high school biology, animals like the hydra, they're called selenerates. They're little invertebrate animals, live in the ocean, have tentacles. They look a little bit like a coral, a single, the soft part of a coral or a sea anemone. But his lab was looking at fertilization. How do selenerates, how do these little things do it? And I was helping him prepare his aquaria and his tanks and things like that. And so I got interested in development in a broad sense. But after a couple of years in biology, most biology at that time was what's called molecular. It's genetics, really. And I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in whole organisms.
Mhm.
And they weren't really offering that. And anyway, to make a long story short, I got disillusioned. I wasn't doing so well academically. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I went into the bookstore and found a book called Anthropology A to Z,
Mhm.
which was like a little encyclopedia, one volume little encyclopedia. And it said, oh, you can study non-human primates, monkeys and apes. I said, oh, that's cool. So I started taking anthropology classes. I said, this is, I found it. This is it. Where have you been all my life? And I found out archaeology was part of anthropology. And then I got into the master's program at Temple, mainly because my undergraduate, my GPA wasn't so stellar, but they were starting a new master's PhD program, and they let me in on probation.
Uh-huh.
And a professor came, Francis Johnston,
Mhm.
came to Temple. He was a famous person in growth. And I liked what he had to say, and I, took classes with him. And anyway, he ended up getting me to Guatemala, where I did my PhD research on how kids grow in relation to the seasons.
Mm. That's
And
so,
that was
yeah.
my start.
Okay, that
And
was
then
your start.
I
Yeah.
just continued on from there.
Yeah, that's super impressive. I love how you kind of like just kind of let it blossom, like, didn't even know where you were going, kind of like a wayward person, student, and just
Right.
kind of developed into this massively renowned, expert on human growth. Very cool. Awesome. Well, now
Well,
background, and now we're going to go forward because your book, the third edition of Human Patterns of Human Growth, is
yes.
It talks about all these different aspects of how, physical growth is affected. And two of the main points that you bring up in the book are SES, also known as socioeconomic status, and SEPE, which is basically SEPE, which is social, economic, political, and emotional. So I know you deep dive into these topics throughout the book, but can you briefly explain what each is and how they can impact human growth?
Well, anthropology has, in the United States at least for a long time, has tried to combine our biological side and our social and cultural side.
Mhm.
That you can't separate that in people.
Right.
You're not a human being
Mhm.
only because of your biology,
Mhm.
right? You're a human being because you live in a culture with other human beings, and you share language, and you share religion, a spiritual life. You share ideas.
Yeah.
You share food. And what is the idea of real foods? What some people eat, other people keep as pets, and vice versa. So anthropologists have always had, in the United States at least, have always had this biological and cultural interaction. So when I started to study growth, there were already people doing that. In fact, I would say my academic grandfather, great-grandfather, was a man who came from Germany. His name was Franz Boas. And in the late 1800s, he came to the Americas not to study people. He was studying the physics. He was a physicist by training. He was
Yeah.
studying the properties of light as it passes through seawater.
Mhm.
I have no idea why he was doing that, but he needed to find pure seawater. All the seawater around Europe was already polluted
Right.
from the Industrial Revolution. So
Mhm.
he went to Canada, and in Canada, he bumped into the Inuit Eskimo people.
Mhm.
And he said, oh man, these people are much more interesting than seawater. And he stayed in the Americas, and he founded the first Department of Anthropology at Columbia University in New York. And right from the beginning, he included growth studies. How do the kids grow up physically and socially?
Okay.
And he measured people, and his students measured people. And so that became part of the tradition in my field of anthropology of growth. So when I started working at Temple, I was exposed to that. And when I went to Guatemala,
Hmm.
I studied this very technical problem or issue of seasonal variation in growth. Do kids grow faster in one season or slower? So a few people have studied that. And I went to Guatemala because I thought there were no seasons, but there's a rainy season, a dry season. It turns out the kids did grow faster. I
Mm.
measured a few hundred kids, and I measured kids from very wealthy families because I didn't want malnutrition or disease or poverty
Right.
to influence my results. I just
Right.
wanted it to be the seasons. And it turns out they grew faster in height in the dry season
Interesting.
and faster in weight a little bit in the rainy season. Uh, I don't know for sure why,
Hmm.
but most likely answer is in the dry season, there's no clouds, there's more
Hmm.
sunlight, there's more vitamin D.
Hmm.
And you need vitamin D to grow.
Absolutely.
It is the growing vitamin, actually vitamin D is more like a hormone. You can
Yes.
take pills of vitamin D,
Hmm.
but it's the ultraviolet light that hits your skin
Hmm.
that converts actually
Hmm.
cholesterol-like precursors into vitamin D that's much more effective.
Hmm.
So people, in sunny places have lots of vitamin D, and people like in, Arctic Canada often suffer vitamin D shortages. Um, and that may be one reason why they're shorter. One reason.
Hmm.
Anyway, so I found they grew faster in the dry season, but I was studying only the rich kids. In
Okay.
Guatemala, the rich kids are like 1% of the population.
Right. Yeah.
80 some percent are very poor.
Hmm.
And on top of being poor, half the country is of the Maya ethnic group,
Hmm.
the original people of Central America, the people who built the pyramids
Hmm.
in Guatemala, Tikal,
Right.
and others, and in southern Mexico, in Yucatan, Mexico. And
Hmm.
these people were once a fantastically powerful civilization
Hmm.
with armies, with physicists and astronomers and medical doctors. But the Spanish arrived and then other Europeans, and it was really a pandemic that did in the Maya. It was smallpox, measles, those diseases that came from Europe. So we're very sensitive to that now. And within 100 years, 90% of the Maya, probably from 20 million, they were down to 2 million
Wow. Wow.
in just 100 years.
That's
They've
crazy.
come back. Today, half the population of Guatemala is Maya. That's
Hmm.
about 9 million people
Wow.
out of the 18 million total in
Yeah.
Guatemala. And the Maya, for the most part, live in poverty,
Hmm.
even today.
Right.
So it's the same story, throughout the Americas.
Hmm.
So I started to get more interested in um, people who had a more difficult time, not their seasonal growth, but just what was going on. And I began to work with another growth study
Hmm.
at the University of the Valley of Guatemala, Universidad del Valle de
Yeah.
Guatemala.
Yeah.
Started to work with another growth study there that was measuring children in the city, in Guatemala City.
Okay.
But they didn't include any Maya. And after a couple of years, I convinced the powers that be they should include Maya, and we started measuring at a Maya school, and we collected another 20 years of data. The study ended in 1999, but we're still working with the data.
Right.
In
Yeah.
fact, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation
Hmm.
asked us to put the data together for a global, worldwide database of what causes children to grow poorly. And
Wow.
the Maya are the shortest people in the Americas.
Yeah.
So is that because they're just naturally short? Is it poor growth? It's because of problems. It's because of social and
Yeah.
economic problems and also emotional problems.
Emotional. Yeah.
That's where the emotional of that SEPE, social, economic, and political
Yeah.
problems. When I say political, I don't mean, who are you going to vote for? I
Hmm.
mean, who has power?
Oh, okay. Yep.
Politics is about power.
Right.
Doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, or in the UK where I live, whether it's, the Labour Party or the Conservative or whatever, it's about power. Who controls the power?
Hmm.
And of course, it's rich people
Yeah.
who have the power. I'm not saying rich people are bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be great if everybody could be rich,
Right.
but there are some bad rich people,
Right.
and there are some very good rich people.
Yeah.
So there's some bad poor people, and there's some very good poor people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about power, and then the emotional is about security.
Mm-hmm.
When kids grow up in fear of not having enough food to eat, fear that the police are, maybe not completely honest and helpful,
Mm-hmm.
or the politicians are not really good,
Right.
or that there's corruption, that there's insecurities. And Guatemala is just full of insecurity. Even rich people live with insecurity. It's one of the hot spots for kidnapping. So rich people, of course, are worth kidnapping more than poor people.
Right.
And everybody I know in Guatemala has either been kidnapped or had someone in their family kidnapped.
Wow.
For money.
Yeah.
Usually for money. Or sometimes it's just to intimidate people.
Right.
And then say, I want your land, I want your house, I want, or for, abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, whatever it is.
Right.
And Guatemala is, I think, the fourth worst place for kidnapping.
Yeah.
In the
Wow.
world.
That's crazy.
So yeah, so that's a tremendous insecurity. When people, adults, live with insecurity, like we all have been living in this COVID pandemic.
Right.
Everybody has issues, emotional issues.
Mm-hmm.
And when kids live with this every day, it's like revving the engine of your car 24/7.
Yeah.
Sooner or later, the engine is going to burn up and fail.
Yeah.
And if you do that to a kid, the first thing that stops is growth, physical growth.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we measure growth, because growth is super sensitive to the quality of the environment.
Okay.
So if the kids don't get food, they don't grow. If they are chronically ill with infectious diseases, fighting off those infections stops their growth.
Okay.
And if they are stressed all the time with food insecurity or safety insecurity or whatever it is, they stop growing.
Oh, wow. That is incredible. Yeah, because that's what I was, so fascinated about when you brought up those two terms, especially SEPE. I didn't understand the emotional part. I thought, oh, maybe because, a family member had died, but you were talking more so of like, type of factors that were, they were fear. And that's huge right there.
It's
and I
really
think
fear. Yeah. I published an article. I mean, some of it is in the book, but there's also an article which is open for anyone to read.
Yeah.
And it's about fear and insecurity and stunting. Stunting is very short stature.
Yeah.
Your height is very short for your age. And that's in the American Journal of Human Biology. If people are interested in reading that.
Yeah, I'll have to post that article below the video as well. And that actually brings up my next question is about the term of stunting as it relates to the growth. Because in the book, you talk about how the Industrial Revolution, child laborers, as well as those who were assessed by their pediatricians, these stressors that you kind of mentioned here and nutritional deficiencies could lead to stunting. So how can you kind of relate this to your life history theory or the James Tanner model that you mentioned in your book, or just kind of explain the term of stunting? Because a lot of people, they think stunting your growth may mean, oh, you fractured your growth plates or you just didn't eat enough, which is the nutritional deficiencies. But talk a little bit more about like your life history model and, some other terms in your book.
Oh, yeah, great. Well, life history is a branch of biology that studies how organisms, it can be any organism, any living thing, from an amoeba or slime mold to elephants or oak trees or people, any living thing.
Right.
Life history is about how living things allocate their limited resources to all the things they have to do.
Right.
Now, what are those things you have to do? You have to grow yourself. Now, if you're a one-celled organism, you don't have to grow so much, but you do have to reproduce. So an amoeba, as we remember from high school, or a paramecium, eventually it lives for a while and then it divides into two. Well, the cells in our body do that as well. We all started out life as one fertilized egg cell. right? One egg cell, one spermatozoa get together, and we're one cell. And today, you and I are trillions and trillions of cells
Yeah.
that have specialized into all the parts that any of us can see on our bodies: fingernails, toes, noses, all the things inside, outside, brain cells, everything. So that's pretty amazing, right?
Absolutely.
And lots of organisms have trillions of cells, highly specialized. So life history is about how you go from that single cell, how you survive, right? What it takes for you to survive, to eat and stay alive, and then how you reproduce. So some organisms live life in the fast lane. They have a fast life history, and they don't live very long themselves. They just reproduce a lot.
All right.
So, like bacteria.
Yeah.
Right? Single-celled organisms. They reproduce a lot, but they don't live very long. A lot of bacteria, every 20 minutes, they make a copy of themselves.
Wow.
But they get eaten up by whatever's around them pretty quickly. So they make billions of copies, and that's how they survive. People live life in the slow lane. Right? It's a good idea to wait more than 20 minutes after your own birth before you start making babies. That's just, free advice from me.
Right.
So people, just the way we're built biologically, we take about 20 years really to grow up, not just physically, because we know that some unfortunate girls are 12 or 13 or having babies. Yeah, but they're not healthy, the mothers, and the babies usually are not healthy.
Absolutely.
Because the mother's not finished her own growth. And it's not just physical growth. She's not finished developing emotionally and politically.
Yeah.
She really can't take care of herself.
Yeah.
Right? She doesn't have power. And the same with young boys. There's a case, I might mention it in the book, but certainly I mention it in my lectures, about a school teacher, a woman, who was sent to jail for having sexual relations with one of her students, who was only 13 at the time. And she got pregnant. So boys can make babies at that age, but nobody really wants them except deranged, teachers. That's why she went to jail. It's a crime. It's abuse. No one wants them because those boys don't have a job. They don't have a car, and they don't have muscles.
Right.
Boys don't get their muscle spurt until about 16 or 17. So, and they really don't, teenage boys don't look like men until they're in their 20s.
Right.
So that's part of our biology, but it's also part of our culture. Many cultures around the world have rituals that get boys to manhood sometime in their 20s and get girls to womanhood usually around 18 or 19, when all the biological growth in girls is finished. So that's how biology and culture work together. So that's been the case throughout human history. Now, in our modern societies, since the Industrial Revolution, a lot of that has been pulled apart because either we keep people away from each other, boys and girls, or we force them together, or we have all these social status differentials between the rich and the poor, and you get a lot of problems, social, economic, political, and emotional problems from these derangements of the way things should work in life history. We should go through all the stages of our development from birth. There's stages before we're born as a fetus, but we'll start with birth, infancy, young children, juveniles, I called, or older children, then teenagers, adolescents, then finally adults. And we should go through those stages. We should be loved. We should be protected. We should be educated. That's healthy life history. And so I connect that life history of how you allocate your resources to your own growth, and then finally to reproduction and taking care of the next generation, along with what I've seen in Guatemala or the United States or other places that I've worked, that let's say in Guatemala, many boys and girls have to start working at a very early age because their families are so poor. So they're sort of thrown into adult work before they're adults.
I see.
And some are thrown into, marriages or or having babies long before they really should,
Mm-hmm.
because of the bad fit between
Right.
our biology and our culture sometimes.
Absolutely. And now in your book, you have this really informative table 5.1. I know, for those who get the book, you can check this out. But this
Okay.
table is so um, informative because it shows the height stature as it varies amongst different populations of the world. For example, the Netherlands being among the tallest people in the world,
Right.
yet their overall BMI is slightly less than that of the United States. I wanted to ask you, get your take and your perspective on this. Is it because of the growth tempo of their skeletal structure is just more genetically prone to being taller, or is it perhaps that they have a more advantageous SEPE, or like
Yeah.
yeah. So you want to?
Yeah. Good questions. Good questions. We should go back about 100 years,
Okay.
actually about 120 years, the year 1900 or so,
Mm-hmm.
and measure some Dutch people in the Netherlands back then. And we would find that they're some of the shortest people in Europe.
What?
Yes.
Interesting.
120 years ago, the Dutch were about the size of some of the Guatemalans, the poor Guatemalans that I measured,
Yeah.
which is, bordering on half the people in Guatemala are stunted. That is, they're very short for their age and sex.
Mm-hmm.
And as adults, I'm talking about adult men in Guatemala are about 5'5" on average.
Okay.
The women are down about 4'10" on
Wow.
average.
Okay.
And the women in Guatemala, these are adults. These are
Mm-hmm.
adults. The women of Guatemala are the shortest women in the world,
Right.
leaving aside the pygmies of Africa,
Right.
who are short for genetic reasons
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps nutritional reasons too.
Mm-hmm.
But the pygmy people really lack certain growth hormones, but the Maya don't lack these. And we know this because when Maya migrate to better places like Florida,
Yeah.
I happen to be visiting my brother who lives in Central Florida, and there's a place here called Indiantown, Florida,
Uh-huh.
near Lake Okeechobee, and a lot of Maya immigrants went there to get jobs back in the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
to get jobs picking fruit.
Okay.
It was a citrus area. And then they moved into other jobs, landscaping and construction. And then the kids got better educated. They became, pharmacists, hairdressers, all kinds of different jobs. And it turned out that back in 1990, there were like 5,000 Maya people around this place called Indiantown, which is not named after the Maya Indians.
Mm-hmm.
It's named after the Seminole Indians who were there when Europeans arrived.
Right.
And the Seminoles got wiped out by the Europeans. Anyway, so I measured the Maya there back in 1990, and they were already several inches taller. These were the kids.
Mm-hmm.
If they were born in the U.S. or the longer they had lived in the U.S., they were taller.
Interesting.
If they had been born and lived most of their life in Guatemala, they were about the size of their age mates back in Guatemala, which is very short.
Right.
But if they lived in the U.S., the longer they lived in the U.S., the taller they were.
Wow.
Back then, I thought it was mostly better food, clean drinking water. They were getting, federal breakfast and lunch programs at school in Florida. They were being able to see doctors. That is part of it.
Okay.
But as I grew and matured in the way I understand things and developed this social, economic, political, and emotional concept of what makes us grow,
Mm-hmm.
I realized that it's also the kids grew better because they were secure, because they had breakfast and lunch at school, because their parents had money in their pocket. Yeah. These are migrant laborers picking oranges and lemons and grapefruit. So they're not getting paid a lot, but they had real money. And because they're living in, the United States, where there is food everywhere if you have money to buy it. There is healthcare if you can afford it, or if you're in a federal program. And they had housing, and they also had support from a school, a private school, run by some nuns. And also the Catholic Church in the town. The town is a very small rural town, and there's a few, churches and things there, but the Catholic Church, the priests there knew about the problems in Guatemala and saw that the Guatemalans who were coming to pick the fruit were different than others who had come through in previous, years. They started to welcome these Guatemalan families and developed a school for migrant children. It's called the Hope Rural School. And hope is the perfect word.
Yeah.
If you live without hope, you are insecure and you don't grow.
Yeah. Wow.
If you don't have hope, you won't grow. And you know what? It wasn't until, Barack Obama said that. That was part of his campaign.
Absolutely. Yeah.
First time he was running for president. And whatever else you can say about Barack Obama, if you don't have hope, you can't grow as a person or as a nation.
Yeah.
So I'll give him credit for that. Okay. And no, I like Obama. Okay. So the Hope Rural School was catering to these kids. And when I explained what I wanted to do, measure the kids and show how much taller I expected them to be in the US, the school welcomed me and helped me. And I also measured children. These were primary school children at the local public school.
Okay.
And they were, 3-4 inches taller. That was in 1990.
Yeah.
And then I went back 10 years later and measured them again, and they were like 5-6 inches taller.
Oh my God.
This was not the same children. This was a new batch of primary school children. And almost all of those kids had been born in the US.
Okay. Gotcha.
5 or 6 inches taller.
That's a big difference.
Is the biggest increase that's ever been recorded.
Wow.
When I go back, if we go back to the work of Franz Boas, I mentioned from the 1890s, he measured immigrants from Eastern Europe and Italy to the United States, to Boston and New York City. And they were about 2 inches taller than the kids back in the old countries. And this hits me at home because my grandparents came from Eastern Europe.
Okay.
They weren't in Boas's study, but they could have been. They came after World War I. But so I'm the grandchildren of immigrants, and I grew pretty well. I can't complain. And but my grandparents were short.
Okay.
They had suffered as children.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
And the fact that I grew to my tallest, I was 6'1.5".
Wow, that's really tall. A lot of my viewers,
186 centimeters. That that's like a foot taller than my grandparents.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
So that shows that it's not the genes.
It's not the genes. Yeah, it's literally your term of SEPE, and I think that's one of the most astounding things that I've read. People think it's so genetic. It's like your genetics just dictate your height or your growth, and your book proves differently, and I love that. And I think my audience is going to love that too. So moving along here, another thing that you talk about is body proportions, and you talk about leg length and sitting height ratios, and you even go on to discuss the Bergman rule of how geographic temperatures of the body growth are somewhat correlated. And so, although no evidence actually proves that this rule holds true, would you say that there's a little bit of merit behind it? Like, for example, limb lengthening patients, when they get their legs lengthened, their body proportions are going to be skewed. But from your research, what is your thought on terms, for the body proportions? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, humans, in addition to coming in all different heights, and there is a normal range of height that is, I think in metric terms, about 20 or 22 centimeters. That is about, that's going to be about 12 inches.
Okay.
For men and for women. There's this range, it's a normal range of 12 inches of average height. That's perfectly normal. Right. So that's just built into us. We could say it's genetic, but it's not just genetic. It's just, how different people grow in combination with their biology and their society and emotions and politics and everything. So that's the first thing. And the same thing with body proportions. Some people have longer arms and legs. Some people have shorter for their height. Some people are wider. And the same thing with what we call body composition. How much muscle, fat, bone. There is variation, and that's normal. And they say vive la différence. some people like, people
Yeah.
who are this way, and some people
Yeah.
like people who are that way, and that's cool,
Right.
right? Okay. But there are some influences
Mm-hmm.
that may be why people from one part of the world kind of look the same. So look at the athletes at the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
Even though athletes are a very biased sample because they're highly selected for their sport, still, certain parts of the world, people seem to run faster over short distances,
Yeah.
or faster over long distances, or swim better, or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, and there may be something to that there's a connection between your geography and the climate,
Right.
how hot it is or cold it is. So the Bergmans and Allen's rules, which go back to the 1800s, they actually go back before Charles Darwin.
Oh,
They're
wow.
pre evolution, they're pre natural selection. When Bergman wrote about, his rule was that if you live in a cold place, you tend to be rounder
Ah,
and maybe have more fat. And if you
okay.
live in a hot place, you're more
Streamlined. Yeah.
streamlined and
Yeah.
less fat.
Okay.
And that's all for what we call thermoregulation, regulating your body temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So you think of a polar bear,
Yeah.
they're big, but
Right.
they're kind of round.
Mm.
Where if you go to the tropics and look at a Southeast Asian sun bear,
Mm-hmm.
they're both smaller than the polar bear, but they're also kind of longer
Right.
and longer. It seems they have longer arms and legs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so they have more surface area to give off more body heat,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, if you put one big ice cube in your drink,
Mm-hmm.
you have a big ice cube, has a lot of volume, but not so much surface area.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a while for the drink to cool down.
Mm-hmm.
But if you chop up the ice,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just at the mall, and the way they serve a drink, it's all ice.
Yeah.
You're paying for water. They have a lot of ice, they pour it in, and it's cold right away because each little piece of ice has lots of surface area,
Okay.
and it cools the drink down right away.
Great.
The same thing with staying warm. If you're big and round,
Mm-hmm.
you keep that heat in you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're narrow and thin. So people in the tropics do tend to be narrower
Okay.
with
Yeah.
longer arms and legs than people in the cold places.
Interesting.
But the problem with Bergman's rule, as I said, number one, it was pre-Darwin and our understanding of biology and how natural selection works. It was pre-genetics. When you look more carefully, you find, okay, people in the tropics seem to be narrower,
Mm-hmm.
and people in the Arctic seem to be a little bit wider,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of variation. And you
Yeah.
can find people in the Arctic who are just as narrow as people in the tropics, and people in the tropics who are wider than people in the Arctic. It's not so neat. And an awful lot of it has to do with social, economic conditions and nutritional status
Mm-hmm.
also.
Right.
Because when the people from those different parts of the world come to a place like the US and integrate into the economics of the society, second, third generation immigrants, they start to look an awful lot like each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Now, again, because of the selection in sports, we look at certain sports like basketball,
Right.
and we say, oh, all those guys, are tall and lean.
Yeah.
But and then we look at maybe baseball, and we think we see a different body shape. But in fact, we know today that the basketball players are starting to get much more
Mm-hmm.
robust,
Yeah. More muscular.
much more muscle,
Yeah.
because you need everything to be a
Right.
great athlete. And the baseball players also are going that way. So it's an awful lot of sports selection
Mm-hmm.
that made people look different in the beginning. And but if you look at real people, not
Yeah.
just the sports players, but
Yeah.
real people, you get an awful lot of that overlap of
Right.
what we call normal variation.
Normal variation. Wow.
Yeah,
That is. Yeah.
so I'm not saying that Bergman's rule, which I learned was like a law. It
Mm-hmm.
was like the truth. And Allen, a student of Bergman, said in hot places you get longer arms and legs, and in cold places shorter arms and legs.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're wrong, but they need to be updated
Okay. Yeah.
to
Updated.
take into account all this variation and all these social economic factors,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to just climate.
Right. And the
That's all I'm saying.
yeah, no, that's fair, and I think that's what I kind of grasped from the
Yeah.
that aspect of your book, and I think a lot of readers were, and I really appreciate you kind of like coming at that Bergman's rule a little bit, not or challenging it in a way. So that was really fair. So now, Doctor,
That's the way science works.
yeah, for sure.
Science, yeah, science. The things that are in my books
Yeah.
should be challenged.
Yeah, by the next generation, and that was in your last
That's
chapter.
right.
There, you
That's
said
right.
this is a challenge to you guys. So,
That's
and
right.
that's what I'm trying to do from a different angle. But,
Excellent.
Dr. Bogin, you also talk about the parent-child height correlations and how
Yes.
they're influenced by more than just genetics. And this is a really powerful topic because a lot of my viewers believe that genetics play a tremendous amount of role. But after reading your book, I'm completely on your side now. Now, going on to say that a child's height isn't just the mid-parent height, meaning the average of the mother-father height, stating that the height, body size, and body proportions are, really plastic and variable. Can you speak on a few of these factors? For example, you can do the genetics versus SEPE battle.
Yeah. Well, it's never either genetics or something else.
Okay.
The genes we inherit
Yeah.
make us human beings
Okay.
instead of oak trees or blue whales or something like that. We share an awful lot of our basic genetic makeup with all living things.
Mm-hmm.
We're somewhere between 99% or maybe a little less genetically similar to chimpanzees, but we're not chimpanzees. So there's something in that 1%, and it's not just that 1%, it's the way the genes we have and chimps have are regulated also. It's not just the genes you have, but it's what turns them on and off. And things like the foods you eat can turn genes on and off. The emotional security or fear you face can turn your genes on and off.
Very cool.
So it's complicated. Nobody knows all the answers to all of this. Mm-hmm. So the fact that chimps don't really have a height because they don't walk on their hind legs. Right. But if you could stretch them out for their body length, from the bottom of their feet to the top of their head, they have long arms. Right. And they kind of, climb trees and swing in the trees. We have long legs and we walk upright on the ground.
Right.
But we can, you can go to the circus and see the trapeze act. And chimpanzees can walk on their hind legs. Mm-hmm. But it's not the most efficient way. So, genes take you just so far. If your life is good, your food is good, your healthcare is good, you have good education, you live with secure, loving people in your family, the height of your parents can predict your height.
Okay.
So when you're 5 years old, the pediatrician can measure you.
Yeah.
And measure your parents. And if you're a boy, you take the mother's height, the father's height, add them together, divide by 2 to get an average.
Yeah.
And if you're a boy, you add about an inch. So because boys will be a little bit more like their father, and girls, you subtract an inch because women tend to be shorter than men, although we know that many, many women are taller than many, many men, and vice versa. Okay, so those are the sort of rules of thumb. Measure the parent's height, get the average, add a little bit for boys, subtract a little bit, and you can predict. That's when the children live in these secure, loving, well-fed, healthy environments.
Okay.
But if you live under poverty, or with fear, warfare, like kids who live in all these places with civil war. Imagine the kids in Afghanistan now. Or Yemen, or Haiti with its, poverty and now hurricanes and all the kids living with COVID right now.
Absolutely.
We wrote a little article that mothers, living in the fear of COVID, women who are pregnant living in the fear of COVID could regulate the mother's genes, the pregnant woman's genes, to sort of make their fetus a little bit smaller.
Wow, that's great.
And lower birth weights, which can carry on for the rest of life. So we won't know what COVID is doing to our physical growth, for like 20 years, but it's probably doing something. So that's why I say it's not just mid-parental height. It's not just genes. It's all these factors. So that formula, calculate the average parent height, add a little bit for boys, subtract. It doesn't work so well for kids living in poverty.
Okay. Yeah.
They
Wow.
don't grow. They don't grow so well,
Right.
and it doesn't work so well when you have rapid changes
Mm-hmm.
in the for the better in the environment. That's what happened to the Dutch we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
They were the shortest men and women in Europe
Right.
in 1900. Now they're the tallest in the world.
Yeah.
They're just a little bit taller than like Norwegians, Swedes,
Mm-hmm.
Danish people. All those Northwest Europeans are the tallest on average.
Right. 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 Yeah.
And they had a 20 centimeter. That's like 12, 13-inch increase in average height in the
Wow.
last 120 years.
Wow.
Why?
Yeah. Why? Yeah.
Well, most of it was after World War II. They
Okay.
suffered terribly in World War II. All of Europe suffered terribly. But the Dutch countries, the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, those countries adopted social, economic, and political programs that
Ah.
gave more security to everybody. So if you are a Dutch citizen,
Yep.
we have to leave out immigrants to the
Mm-hmm.
Netherlands and these countries. But if you're a Dutch native citizen, women get months off during pregnancy.
Oh.
Fathers get months off for the birth of their child.
Wow.
Everybody gets high quality health care.
Okay.
If you can't work, the social security system is much better than anything the United States has come up with. Okay, I can tell you that. And just the sense of security is much better. And the fact that the lowest paid full-time worker
Yeah.
and the highest paid corporate executive are not that far apart in salary. Of
Yeah.
course, the CEO gets paid maybe 10 times what the worker
Right.
gets. But
Yeah.
in the United States, it may be 1,000 times.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
The income inequality is so much greater in the United States, in the UK, I have to say also,
Yeah.
and countries like that.
Yeah.
And the average height of the UK, men
Yeah.
and women, even the wealthy,
Yeah.
and in the United States is less.
Wow.
Not because the wealthy can't afford all the good stuff,
Right.
but because the quality of the environment just
Mhm.
doesn't make people as happy.
Yeah.
People who do those happiness surveys find that the Northwest Europeans,
Or more.
despite having the highest taxes in the world,
Yeah.
all right, are happier.
Yeah. Happier.
In the United States, we complain about taxes all the time, but the Dutch and the Swedes, the Swiss, yes,
Mhm.
not the Swiss, excuse me,
Mhm.
the Swedes, yes,
Yeah.
and the Norwegians and the Finns, they know they'll be taken care of.
Uh-huh.
And they pay super high taxes, but they get services
Right.
from their government,
And that
and
brings.
they live in a very secure environment.
I love it. I love it.
So,
Yeah, that keeps highlighting that aspect of your SEPE, and that just
right.
keeps going on and revisiting that topic.
Yeah,
Now, as we spoke about earlier about Franz Boas and his term of plasticity, of how human growth isn't fully based on genetics, and I love to talk
right.
about this, but that term of epigenetics started to surface a little bit as your book started to talk
Yes.
a little bit about that. Now, if you could put a percentage on how much epigenetics and SEPE play a role in human growth versus genetics alone, what would you say? What would be like just a rough number that you'd throw at, like, all right, SEPE plays this much, genetics plays this much, epigenetics this much, or can you not say it and it varies for every?
No, great question. And
Okay.
I can give you my
Rough estimate. Yeah.
estimates. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. First of all, epi means above.
Right.
So epigenetics means what's happening above the level of the genes.
Yeah.
So at one level above the gene,
Mhm.
like I said, what you eat can turn on or off your genes.
Right.
And that's because eating like fruits and vegetables, you get
Mhm.
lots of vitamins.
Yeah.
Vitamin C. Vitamin C or vitamin A can actually attach to your chromosomes in your DNA,
Yeah.
and it can turn on or turn off the production of the the things that genes make, which is
Oh,
mostly what are called amino acids, which
yeah, yeah, yeah.
eventually can become proteins.
Hmm.
So every not everything, an
Hmm.
awful lot of the stuff that we're made of is built from amino acids that become proteins. There's
Hmm.
thousands, tens of thousands of proteins in our body.
Right.
Not muscle is just one of them, but I mean, everything.
Hmm.
Hormones, many of them are proteins.
Hmm.
Some are made from fats also.
Right.
So you need everything. So a good diet will allow the turning on and the turning off, the regulation of the genes at the right time.
Okay.
So that's epigenetics. But also, like I said earlier, living in fear
Yeah.
can turn on or turn off certain genes
Hmm.
that also can slow growth. So epigenetics goes from just when I say above the gene, it could be right at the gene itself, attaching to the genes like
Yeah.
vitamin C, or it can be something that's happening, in your
Environment.
psychology and
Oh,
emotional
psychology.
life.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so when we measured the kids in the United States, the Maya children in the United States in about the year 2000, and they were 5 or 6 inches taller,
Hmm.
I would say that um, probably 2 or 3,
Okay.
about half of that was due to better food, more food, health care,
Hmm.
and the other half was due to these epigenetic factors.
Okay. Okay. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, because like I said, my own grandparents' generation were about 2 inches taller when
Hmm.
they were measured by Boaz and his students
Yeah.
back in about the year 1900.
Hmm.
But the Maya kids I measured, as soon as they got here, they got 4 inches taller. But
Wow.
that's because the stress that their families faced in Guatemala, the
Yeah.
insecurity, the warfare. Guatemala was until 1996 was in a civil war,
Right.
and there were terrible atrocities. Whole villages
Hmm.
bombed and burned, and people tortured. It was just terrible.
Yeah.
So the stress they faced accounts for at least half. So
Yeah.
3 inches stress, 3 inches better food and healthcare.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. So epigenetics does play a role, and it's not
Absolutely
just the genes, and
right.
what you can eat can play a role too. Very cool.
Right.
Now, the next topic that I wanted to bring up, and this is a really popular topic amongst my viewers, they love to kind of fascinate and about this, and that's growth plates. Growth plates being responsible for the
Right.
longitudinal growth of the long bones that affect stature, up until they senescent, stop.
Right.
So you point out some flaws in the theory that states that pre-chondrocyte stem cells are limited in supply,
Right.
explaining that it's not true because of the massive number of variations seen in growth amongst different populations, and that
Right.
the self-renewal of the growth plates through signaling pathways like mTOR pathway, which I did a paper on, so I'm really big about that. Can you talk a little bit about how I guess in a way, like kind of extrapolate a little bit on this idea of growth plates and the pre-chondrocyte stem cells?
Right. Well, I'm sure your viewers probably know more than I do about this. So this is not really my direct research. I have to
Right, right.
preface. So I'm basing this on excellent work done by other people
Okay.
in other labs.
Yeah.
But what we all know is that bones grow
Hmm.
at their growing ends, or their
Hmm.
epiphyses.
Yeah.
So there's an area where cells um, will multiply
Mhm.
and go from cartilage type cells and transform finally into bone cells. And
Hmm.
we know that growth stops. Human beings do stop growing,
Yeah.
except in certain disease conditions
Hmm.
where
Right.
there's overgrowth. But people are in that group of mammals or
Yeah.
vertebrates where there is um, determined growth. There's a final adult size. There are some creatures that keep growing all their life,
Hmm.
some reptiles and some fish, but they don't live so long.
Right.
So they never become those monsters that we see in late night horror pictures.
The
Uh,
megalodons.
Quite, because yeah, they don't live long enough to grow that big usually. Anyway, so people will stop growing, and you'll stop growing um, we used to say, the old textbook said, because the growing ends, that growth zone
Hmm.
disappears, it
Yeah.
fuses. The
Right.
epiphysis fuses with the shaft of the bone.
Hmm.
But we know that's not true because lots of people never have full fusion of the
Hmm.
epiphysis with the metaphysis, it's
Right.
called the shaft of the bone.
Yeah.
Other people, we learn a lot from unfortunate disease conditions,
Hmm.
how normal growth takes place.
Right.
Because when kids are ill with growth disorders, then you can figure out what's really going on,
Hmm.
what has gone wrong,
Right.
and try to find either a drug or a therapy or a treatment that'll fix it.
Hmm.
So it's not that simple.
Okay.
Growth usually will stop eventually. Now,
Yeah.
is it because you run out of those pre-chondrocyte cells, or they're no longer sensitive to the hormones that make them both divide and grow larger and convert from cartilage into bone?
Hmm.
Is it no? I don't think anyone knows the answer to that
Okay. All
just
right.
yet.
Yeah.
But of course, there are lots of people looking at that and what therapies could be used to perhaps encourage more growth
Yeah.
or to stop growth.
Right.
From what I've heard talking to clinicians, pediatricians, parents bring their sons to a pediatrician because they think their son is too short. And they
Yes.
bring their daughters in because they think their daughters are too tall.
Mhm. Yeah.
They want them to be just right. And they can give you certain drug treatments that'll stop your growth,
Hmm.
steroids, for instance. Um, and they can give you certain drugs that will promote more growth, like growth hormone, but they're within a small range.
Right. Yeah.
There's still something deeper and
Yeah.
more powerful going on than
Yeah.
just the genetics or just the hormones or
Yeah.
just the food. We know that, again, those Dutch people who got so tall,
Yeah.
we know there's something called the community effect. If you live in a place where people um, both value greater height
Yeah. Yeah.
and encourage you, not by saying grow, 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 grow,
Right.
but they just, the children of the aristocracy,
Hmm.
the kings, queens, princes, the nobility in Europe were always taller than the children of if there was a middle class or the peasants. And this was true even when they were all growing up in the same place. There's a few schools
Hmm.
back in the 1700s, 1800s, that took in the children of lower classes and mixed them with the children of the nobility
Mm.
from a very young age, from
Hmm.
2 years of age. And during the school year, they all lived together. They had
Uh-huh.
the same food, exposure to the same illnesses.
Right.
We think they got the same medical care.
Yeah.
They went home on school holidays, right? They may have suffered differently then, but the point was that throughout their lives, the children of the nobility were always taller. And we think, working with some other colleagues, we've come up with a community effect hypothesis we're testing,
Yeah. Yeah.
that the nobility always just knew that they were better. They
Interesting.
were going to be politically more powerful.
Wow. That is
That's,
so
again, the
crazy.
politics. And
Yeah.
we see this even in Europe today. The royal family of England
Uh-huh.
is taller on average than all the other English
That's
men,
crazy.
right? The royal family of Spain, the
Hmm.
king of Spain today, Philippe, is, like 6'5". When he gives, and his father was taller than average,
Hmm.
about 6'1" or 6'2". And
Yeah.
when he's out in public, even his cousins just are dwarfed next to him.
Wow.
Now, these are individual cases, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't, you can't base the whole world on it, but
Right.
we do see this throughout the world,
Yeah.
that if you live in a community of taller people,
Hmm.
you tend to grow towards
That.
the average for the community. If you live
Average.
in a community of shorter people, even if you're healthy, well-nourished, wealthy,
Yeah.
but you don't know that there's taller people out there, you
Yeah.
don't grow as tall.
Interesting. That's
Yeah,
crazy. I
it
love
is
that.
just amazing. We have some idea of the biological mechanisms. It has
Yeah.
to do with emotional factors that
Right.
affect hormones.
Mm-hmm.
When you get stressed, you pump out stress hormones.
Yeah.
And those stress hormones, adrenaline,
Yeah.
epinephrine, things like,
Mhm.
they have effects on growth hormone.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
know that.
Right.
So, there's possibilities out there. That's research
To be
to
done.
be done. Yeah.
To be done. Yeah, and that kind of brought up one little thing that I remember in your book, like talking about the siblings' height. Like if one sibling's growing faster, the other one kind of like will naturally kind of speed up a little bit, just because they're
Yes.
or kids like that. That's really cool, and that highlights some really important things that I will share with my audience. Well, yeah, man, Dr. Bogin, this was an amazing interview. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your third edition of your book, Patterns of Human Growth, which we just basically said the whole book here on the interview, but for those
Right.
people who are interested in understanding the how and why people grow the way that they do, what explanation can you give people to go and check your book out, for either researchers who want to look deeper into this, other future PhD students, people who are into biomedical sciences,
Yeah.
other clinicians, and for pediatricians, parents who are thinking about their kids and trying to get what kind of, I guess, one-liner, or just, yeah, you can just go ahead and explain why you think this book can really help impact their decisions or their perspective on human growth. I knew that was a lot, but
Well, it's not a book to read when you get into bed at night.
yeah,
No, it is a book to read if you get into bed at night and want to fall asleep quickly. No, it is, it's a kind of textbook, but I do tell stories.
yes, you
It
do.
is the story of why people grow the way we do
Mm-hmm.
and why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you do a fantastic job, because not only do you go into the why, the how, but you also explain what makes up those those aspects. You also talk about the biology. I felt like I was learning biology 101 all over again. I was like, man, but he talked about it from this perspective, and I was like, I never thought of it that way. I felt like it was like a fresh, unique angle.
Thanks.
So you did a wonderful job with the book. And everyone, if you want to check out the book, The Patterns of Human Growth, you can check out it. It's the third edition, the 2021 edition, I think it is.
Yeah, it's got a 2021
Yeah, edition.
copyright date in
Yeah,
it.
I'll have the link posted in the show notes. And all I can say, guys, is that this book is fantastic for those of you who are thinking about limb lengthening and wondering, about your own height and just, growth factors, things that affected your growth over the years. This explains it all. So be sure to click on the link, go buy the book. Do Dr. Bogin a big favor, because he, literally, he is one of the best world-renowned experts on human growth in the world. So, and if you have any questions for him, I'm sure that Dr. Bogin, can you be reached online anywhere, or do you have any like social media?
Yes, if you Google me
Yeah.
right away, you'll see my Loughborough University email address.
Okay. There
And
you go.
I will answer all reasonable and polite questions.
There you go, guys. Be polite, be respectful. Yeah. So, well, Dr. Bogin, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective and talking about your book. It's really amazing. And yeah, I wish you well.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hope to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that was a really unique perspective that Dr. Bogin talks about with his proposed concept of SEPE, the social, economic, political, and emotional factors that play into human growth and development. Basically showing that there's more than just genetics that factor into how big you're going to get or how tall you're going to grow. Now, if you're interested in more of Dr. Bogin's research or his findings, you can find all of that in his third edition of his book, The Patterns of Human Growth, in the show notes. And until next time, this is Victor from Cyborg for Life, signing out.